on this computer, so we are recording now. The format of this is going to be a little different of this meeting. It's going to be a little different. We're going to limit topics to a couple that we can discuss. And the public will have an opportunity to offer comments before we start talking, for example, about water benefit units, should be, or and then after the board discusses it, the public will have a time to offer comments before we go on to the next topic, which in this instance will be paper streets.
Eric, can you speak up a little bit?
I can speak up a little bit.
Perfect.
So I move the computer a little closer.
Yeah.
That's better. But before we start talking about this, I would like to mention NICOM training to board members. There's some very good training coming up. What little I know, I learned from NICOM presentations or materials. In fact, much of the water discussion here is based on a NICOM publication, Administration of Public Water and Sewer Utility Systems. So I would strongly urge you to, if you possibly can, get in touch with Kim and register. It's a bargain. It's at home, remote, and only $99. So it's a tremendous bargain. So I would strongly urge board members to take advantage of that. And the first topic will be on water benefit unit, changing a small change in how the number of benefit units that are charged to. I'm hearing some strange audio. Is anybody else hearing some?
I'm getting some feedback, I think, from you.
There is feedback. I don't know if everybody else goes on mute, whether that will solve it.
Everybody on mute?
No, Kim, you're not on mute. And who else?
I
think Kim's the only one, and now me. I was on mute. I'll put myself.
I'm not hearing the feedback anymore. Is it better? Okay, good. Last week I emailed a proposal to change the number of flat rate units that certain homeowners and business owners got. I hope you've had a chance to read through that. I know a number of you have. I've had some very beneficial and informative email conversations with. I appreciate your chiming in with information. So I will, at this point, open it up to the first session of comments on it. If anybody would like to be heard. Unmute yourself. We can be somewhat informal since there's so few people here.
Has any of this been released to residents, or
Yes.
This is just a discussion that the board has had?
The proposal, the same thing that you got, the residents got, so that they could have time. It was a little wordy, so give them a little time to digest it.
Okay.
Yeah, this is Chris Nellis, and I'm sitting here with Lydia. The document we received was written for the town of Malta or the Malta Water District, etc. Is this just an example of what we would use, and would that document be rewritten to address the businesses and homes that are in Round Lake? For example, that document had comments about car washes, lots of commercial property and businesses, and it seemed to have a lot in it that didn't really specifically apply. So is this just like, this is an example of what we would do and we haven't produced it? Or is this the document we would base our fees on?
No, that was an example of the idea of a benefit unit. It's what Maltaville did with, to determine, because they were looking at starting from scratch and they wanted to establish a rational, logical basis for what they charged different residences. So that was what they did. That was just to establish the kind of the logical and rational framework for doing something like that. It was certainly not intended to be an example of what we do, but it was just the idea of using the idea of a benefit unit in order to charge, as opposed to, well, there are a number of other ways that buildings can be charged.
I think you make a good point, though, Chris, in that the idea behind this evaluation is also to provide a perspective idea for what we would do going forward. So, not to say that there's going to be a car wash built in the Village of Round Lake, but if there were a type of business that came into the Village of Round Lake, if we had a document that looked at benefit units in a prospective way, then should such a business come to the village, or should some type of residential construction occur in the village, we would have a rational basis for where to proceed going forward for charging a new unit in the village, while also addressing, what currently exists here. So I think that would be the idea, is to make it perspective so that we could move forward with it, but also to provide some rational basis for existing structures within the village. I think that's kind of what when the water committee had met, that was what we had discussed.
So as a follow-up, if I'm just to rephrase to make sure I'm understanding correctly, is as a resident, we would expect to see a Round Lake benefit unit document that would come out in detail that we would actually review obviously at some future date, because that hasn't been prepared, and then we could have our input as to where we thought it was, good or bad, or et cetera. Is that correct?
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, we have to document it certainly somewhere, and in a policy is where it should be documented.
Gary, when you were saying, or who was on the committee? Who was the committee that is suggesting this?
Frank Spano from Victorian Landing, Matt Goldrick, me, Aaron. Tina was briefly, but she had too many conflicts.
I don't know how other municipalities figure water. But it was interesting to me to note that businesses, like restaurants or office buildings, office complexes that might use a lot of water are charged the same as a homeowner. Is that typical?
Well, I hesitate to say what is typical. I've been trying to research that, and there are just so many different ways that municipalities charge for water. Some charge based on assessed value of a property. Some charge on. Let me show you an example of something that I came across today from the town of Potsdam, the village of Potsdam. Okay. Hope you can read that. The total user cost equals the fixed user cost multiplied by the equivalent domestic unit plus the variable user cost. So that's one of the more arcane solutions to the problem. We are at the moment And discussing this with Dixie, how it came about, we based our flat rate units on the Saratoga County District sewer district number 1. But that led to what I showed you in the document of what I consider kind of an odd situation where you have an apartment building with 3 units being charged 3 units, 6 units being charged 6, and apartment with 20 rentable units being charged 6. It didn't make a whole lot of sense. And so,
But isn't that just because something was, why was that done with the 20 unit?
because at the time, the Saratoga County Sewer District charged them 6 sewer hookups. But the idea of the benefit unit, for example, you can say that a three-bedroom apartment or a 3-unit apartment building has 3 benefit units. They benefit to the tune of, they have 3 rental units. 6-unit apartment benefits to the tune of 6 rental units. Regardless of the size, they could be a tiny little efficiency apartment, or they could be a luxury suite. A 20-unit, or 22 as I found out, 22-unit building like the Inn is being charged 6 flat rates, but it has 22 rental units.
Right, but couldn't we just say if you have a rental unit, then it's a unit. It's a residential unit, it's a unit.
That is exactly the purpose of the meeting.
If I had to guess, oh, sorry, Paul, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, before we get off what Heidi said earlier, I just want to clarify something. Heidi said that it looked like businesses would get, or small business, 1 unit, just like a home would. But I read it a little differently. It looked to me like there's a square footage amount too when it's a business. Now, we wouldn't necessarily use the same square footage perhaps that Malta does, but so theoretically a business of a medium size might automatically be 2 because they get 1 as just a business and 1 if their square footage is over a certain amount, and then the bigger it gets, the more unit. Is that correct, Gary? My read on it?
Well, for example, there are a number of ways. This is from the NICOM booklet. This one is on sewage rate, sewer rents, I think, but it's very similar. There are sewer rents may be based on consumption of water, the number and kind of plumbing fixtures, and I believe, if I understood what Dixie said to me, that is what we are basing, excuse me, I've got to let somebody in here, what we are basing our current numbers on. So that's permissible. Number of persons served on the premises, connected with and served by the sewer system, volume and character of sewage, any other equitable basis determined by the local legislative body, including but not limited to any combination of the foregoing. And as mentioned in water rates, there are, in determining the most common variables used for measuring benefit are frontage, area, assessed value, the unit method, which is what we're talking about here, or a combination thereof. So essentially, as long as it's my reading, and Tom, please jump in whenever you feel like it, as long as we are logical and not arbitrary and capricious, we are on solid ground.
Well, back to the building discussion, just one more comment, Tom, before that I see that it has a square footage amount. It's just, I think you could really put a lot of people in an office building, maybe not lately, but that the restaurants are 1 unit per 1,000 square feet of business area, and the businesses are, office complexes are 3,000 square feet. And I'm just saying, did we come up with this, or has this been used before, or
Which
what?
document are you talking about? I'm a little,
Well, the pages aren't listed, but it is in the document that you gave us.
the one that I gave, okay.
The Malta one.
This was the Malta-based system that they used for Maltaville. So when designing their sewer district, they were using a benefit unit. And so this would be an example of something that we could use into, I think Paul's point, we could adapt the square footage requirements. We could, I think in this case, there was like a free amount of square footage. We could, the whole idea would be to just look at a system that might be a little bit more equitable than what we currently have that fits our needs better now. We can design any system that we want as long as it's equitable. But this would be an example of the benefit unit system.
And if you look at the second to last page like this, it has benefit unit listed here. This is from the assessor's manual. So Volkswagen, 3 bays, don't use any water. But because they are an automotive repair shop, they would have got hit with 5 benefit units, just by the nature of being a automobile repair shop.
Well, that doesn't seem equitable, does it?
It does not seem equitable.
Well, I just wanted to go back to the point about the inn being charged 20 plus units. Probably it's charged a lesser unit because those are not apartments. And if you characterize it as rentable units, that's a whole different thing. But if I were representing the inn in this discussion, I would say, well, you can go ahead and assign units to apartments, but we're not that. The rooms don't necessarily even each have bathrooms. So I wasn't obviously in on the original discussion, but I expect that's how Saratoga came up with that assignment for that premises.
Well, that could be, but Peter showed me some drawings of the inn, and the 3rd floor alone had 6 bathrooms. So I'm not sure how accurate this is. And it could certainly just be a case where there have been renovations and we haven't been aware of them, or we haven't kept track, or.
Well, that seems to me to be an entirely different issue. And I doubt they'd put in 22 kitchens. So I don't think those under any matrix would qualify as apartments. So you'd have to probably make an adjustment to your units right there. You're not going to achieve that number that you're hoping for.
I'd like to just chime in on that too, because I really think we're talking about separate things here. We're talking about the inn, and we're talking about the rest of the village. And the inn was charged this, I believe it's 6 units originally, based on what the county estimated they were discharging into the sewer system. So we have a situation where we're assigning 20 units to the inn, and so the guy's paying roughly, what is it, $430 per unit. He's got 6 units, $2,500 something dollars. Which gonna now charge him 20, which puts him over the $8,000 range. And I don't really know what evidence we have to suggest that he should be charged that. I mean, no one, we've never had an inspection. I don't know who's been in there. Gary seems to know that there's X number of bathrooms on the top floor, but I don't know anything else about the building. So I think we all agree that they're under-assessed, but the methodology to find them at the 20 unit range, to me, seems very arbitrary. And I guess if I was the guy who owned the building, I'd be all over the village saying, you can't do this to me.
on that point, I sort of agree with you, but I think it would make sense that we would charge 20 or 22 units if that's the only information we had. And we would want to document that maybe, like, and my thought was, well, if some of these are just a room, like a boarding house, a room, and they're sharing a bathroom, that theoretically 2 or 3 of those would count as one unit. They're sharing a bathroom. And so we could be in a situation where if the inn provides proper information and or allows us to inspect, to check it out, we would adjust the amount, and the 20 or 22 would only be, well, if you don't want us to go in there, we're assuming you have 22 units. But I think we would need to factor in what you're saying, Tom, that that if there's someone that has a room, because our idea was, well, that cost should be passed on to the renter. But if you're renting a room at a very low rate, it's really hard to suddenly force them to pay, you know, $50 or $100 more, or whatever it is a month. So I agree with you, Tom, but I think it would require them showing us what they have and us coming up with a plan for individual rooms without their own bathroom or ones that are sharing.
And I would respond in this way. I agree completely with all of you on this. We can't get in there. We don't even know what kind of certificate of occupancy they're operating under. Peter might be able to shed, or Gary might be able to shed some light on that. But you know, unless you can get in there and see what it is, and I've got other issues with this whole thing, but it's just speaking about the inn. You know, unless we can have some kind of verification of what's in there and how many bathrooms, how many kitchens. I mean, to come up with 20 or 22, I mean, okay, cool. If it flies, it flies. But if I was the landlord, I'd probably be taking you all the card.
Well, then they would provide proof, wouldn't they? I mean, that's I mean, the whole thing is that we're charging them arbitrarily 6 benefit units now, not knowing, or 6 flat rates right now, not having any idea whether that's an appropriate number or not. The best evidence that we have is that there's 22 rooms, right? So, and this whole thing about designing the system is not specifically to do with the inn. It's to have a rational and prospective system for evaluating properties within the village and what's an appropriate flat rate to charge. You know, the inn happens to be, in this case, you know, sort of an outlier within the village, and that's why we're discussing it a lot. But this whole idea about reform, you know, changing the system a little bit is not specifically to sort of stick it to the inn. It's really to come up with a really rational system for how we charge flat rates going forward. Now, if the inn comes back and says, you know, you can't do, you know, if we decide, for instance, that 22 is what it's going to be based on a benefit unit system, and the inn disputes that, that's, you know, then they can provide us the evidence that supports their rationale. So I think it's totally a fair way to look at this. But again, and we don't have to go exactly with how Maltaville did a benefit unit system. We can create our own system. But I think this is a very fair way of looking at how we assess flat rates within the village that's rational and that can be adapted at, you know, if the village changes going forward, if we add a business or there's a new multi-unit residential or whatever, it enables us to be flexible and respond to that. So that's kind of what I've always seen with it. I don't think this is about, I really, you know, although the inn is clearly a situation here that would be potentially result in an increase in flat rates, I don't see this as being about the inn specifically. I see this to be about making a fair system for the entire village. And you know, so I really don't want to get twisted around the axle with how this impacts a specific building.
Well, I don't disagree 100% with you, Matt. But I do think the system we have now, if you exclude the inn, and if you exclude Victorian landings, which we're not even talking about, but I don't know what's unfair about the system. Everybody gets a flat rate charge. If they're a landlord, they get X, flat rate plus X for the number of apartments they have. And if you're a business, you get the flat rate plus. I don't know what's so unfair about it. I don't know why this has to be revamped. We're talking right now about charging people who have additional acreage extra fees for water just because they have 5 acres or 10 acres or 20 acres, where I'm not getting charged an additional fee because I mean, it doesn't seem fair. Everybody pays the same.
Gary, can I speak?
Nobody is suggesting that. That was just an example of what Maltaville did to establish their new water district.
Well, Gary, agreed. I mean, if that was an example, if that wasn't an example, it shouldn't have been in the document you released to everybody, because the impression I got was that if you're Fred Sievers and you have 23 acres, you're getting charged for a unit plus an additional 23 times 0.01%. But that's what it says in the document. So how am I supposed to understand it any differently?
Obviously, I wasn't clear enough, and I apologize for that, but that was certainly not the intent. It was just to establish the efficacy of and the fact that it exists, the idea of a benefit unit. That was one way of doing it. There's lots of different ways. So, Thomas. Mr. Peterson.
2 comments. One is, Tom, you were saying if you exclude Victorian Landings and if you exclude the inn, then it's not unfair. But we can't exclude them because they are paying. And the other is, Mr. Mayor, is the question tonight whether we should proceed with examining, fine-tuning our system of billing customers, or is it to take a look at this particular document?
Both. Well, when you say billing customers, what do you mean?
People paying water and sewer rents.
I would say both to some extent. Paul.
A couple of hopefully really quick things just to clarify my mind. I've always been thinking about the water and not the sewer. Do these benefit units affect the amount of sewer payments you make too, or is that totally unrelated?
Although historically it appears that the water units piggybacked on top of the sewer units, that was not the plan here. That would be a separate discussion.
Okay, great. So that's what I thought. I just want to clarify that. A couple of quick things that seem to be, once again, I know we're going to deal with the inn and the Victorian Landing will also be part of this. But just to clarify for the rest of the village, let's say how this would impact. 2 things I was thinking of. One is there seems to be which we haven't spoken about yet, I think, is whether we value the concept that I think Gary was putting forth, maybe the committee did. I know you have, Gary, that one idea here is to promote in-house, landlord occupied homes, and in effect slightly discourage people just from outside buying a place and renting it out and living somewhere else. So that would be one definite change, and that's up. We'd have to come to terms. How do we feel about that? That would definitely affect several people I know of who, if you got one freebie, let's say, if you lived in the house, you paid the one, you could have one rental without adding on. That would definitely be a means to encourage owner-occupied rentals, which I think, as Gary said, is usually less of a concern. I also was thinking, and this relates a little to the end, is there are people who look at just renting a room, and that because they need the money or they have an extra room, the kids have gone off to college. Now, I don't think we would want to say that's in a separate apartment. They're just renting for whatever. Maybe they're renting for trade, for working on the house. But I think that might tie in nicely with, if we're looking at encouraging owner-occupied residences, then if you have a residence and you rent a room and they're sharing your bathroom and stuff, it would also fall under that, where you wouldn't have to worry about, you wouldn't have to keep it a secret. You wouldn't have to worry about getting an extra water charge. So
I would agree with Paul. I mean, if it's owner occupied rental with a unit in it, they could just pay one rate. If the owner doesn't live there, and they have, if it's a two-family house and they're both rentals, that rental is tax deductible to the owner, the water bill. Me as a village resident, I cannot deduct my water bill on my income taxes. But if it's a rental property, there are many advantages to rental property. One is you can depreciate it over so many years. The other is you can deduct water, sewer, all kinds of bills because it's a rental property. Also, commercial properties can deduct whatever water and sewer bill they pay on their taxes. So there are many advantages to having rental properties, if it's not owner occupied. And if it's owner occupied, you're screwed.
Yeah. I think there is some people who are annoyed, who are getting charged because they have a rental unit. And I think one aspect that they think is unfair, or at least I've heard, is that they know of people in the village who are renting a floor or a room kind of under the table, and they're sharing the bathroom and the kitchen. And it's like, well, okay, this has its own entrance, and it's one, why am I paying extra for that? And they're getting some income and they don't have to pay. So that's one thing I like about encouraging the owner occupied. And once you go beyond that, if somebody has a house and there are two rental units, they'd get the one freebie, but they'd be charged for the other. So I like the idea personally of encouraging owner occupied, and that clears up any issue if you're just renting a room in your house under the table, so to speak, or if you have a little apartment. And I hadn't really thought of what Peter was saying, but those are good points about
the IRS says that if you have rental property, you can pass the cost of water and sewer on to the tenant, or you can pay it yourself and deduct it from your taxes.
Well, Tom can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think anybody can deduct water bills from their taxes.
If it's a rental property and it's not owner occupied, you can.
Tom, you're on. Tom Bergen, you're on mute. Tom Bergen, you're on mute. Yeah, there you go.
Tom Bergen, can you hear us? You're on mute. Unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me?
Okay, start again.
All right, sorry. I was just trying to get some clarification from Peter, but I was also thinking that the definition of a separate living space would be if you come into a building in a common entrance, but go to a separate living space that's totally enclosed, bathroom, kitchen, whatever, or that means you're a renter or tenant. If you go into a separate entrance to the same building with a separate living space, you're a tenant. So if Heidi, I'm sorry, Heidi, I don't know if you do this, I don't do it, but I'm just using you as a poor example. If Heidi rents a room, but the person comes in to not a separate living space. The person comes in and shares Heidi's kitchen, shares the bathrooms or whatever. That's a whole different story. And I don't know, in this case, would Heidi get to deduct water and sewer and all that stuff, whereas a landlord wouldn't or would?
No, she wouldn't, because it's owner occupied. She wouldn't be able to deduct it because she lives there. When I worked with the state, we used to get around these laws by saying that people are not paying rent, they're home sharing. I'm sharing my house. I may charge somebody to live there, but they're helping me with my bills. They're helping me pay my sewer, my water, my electric, blah, blah, blah. It's home sharing. I'm not renting, I'm home sharing. If the owner does not live in the house, it's a rental unit. If it's a rental unit, you can deduct, you can depreciate that unit. You can deduct the water, sewer, mortgage interest, and property taxes on your income taxes. There are many advantages to having rental units that are not owner occupied.
So can I just continue with Peter for a second? So you're telling me a landlord, I hesitate to throw names around. I don't think I'm gonna, but a landlord who we all know, who rents part of his house out in a separate entrance to their living quarters, separate bathrooms, separate kitchen. He's home sharing?
No, he is not home sharing because he has a separate kitchen and separate living quarters. But if you share living quarters, it's home sharing. If it's a separate apartment, it's not home sharing.
Okay, so if Heidi was renting
But that
a,
apartment
but he's
cannot
home
be,
sharing.
yeah, somebody who's renting out a room in their house is just home sharing. I mean,
Yeah, okay.
yeah. But if you have an apartment in your house, you're collecting rent, you have to claim that income. If you don't live in the house, if you're renting it out, you can deduct that. You can deduct all those bills off your federal taxes. You can deduct your water, sewer. As a homeowner in the village, I can't deduct my water and sewer. But if I own 3 or 4 rental properties in the village, I would be deducting them all from my water and sewer. I would have to pay. I don't know. Maybe you're not making money on it too. I mean, it's not saying it's gravy, but it's saying that it's a deductible expense for people. So I always
Can I jump in a second?
Yeah.
I guess.
Well, Chris, is that you?
Yeah, I'm sorry, it's Chris. I just want to jump in quickly. We've gotten, I'm listening to all this about using our benefit units or changing the way we determine what units are. And we can have all sorts of discussions about tax laws and everything else. As you know, we own the house across the street and we rent that house. And when I filed my TurboTaxes and tried to deduct everything, it basically said, you're not in a real estate business, you don't get to deduct anything. But so, and Peter has said, oh, these are all deductible and blah, blah, blah. But I think by talking about tax law, we're getting way off the subject. And which is the subject was, right now, Round Lake uses the Saratoga County Water Authority system for determining units in the village. And I'm assuming that if somebody wishes to dispute that, they have to go to court and defend their system and method for determining those units. And the only thing, and that's what the village adopted, I don't know, I think it was about 10 or 12 years ago. It's like, okay, Saratoga County Water Authority has figured out, and I looked at it tonight, if you look at their annual report, they have all the kind of formulas, Gary, that you laid out for the benefit units of it's a business and square footage and number of bathrooms and, and if it's they have all these rules and regulations, and that's where those units come out to. And the fact that the inn may have expanded more than the county sewer is aware of, and they should be charged more units, is another question that can be looked at. But my only point is that if the village wants to create its own unit measurement, which is what Gary's proposal is, that's fine if we want to go through that effort. But I'm also concerned about the fact that, if we come up with a whole plan and the majority of changes only affect a small number of people, in other words, we charge per acre, although we probably won't do that, and Fred Severs has to pay 25% more, or we rearrange it so the inn is charged 18 units instead of 6. And this is a question for Tom Peterson. It sounds like if we made that drastic a change just to one person, that would be pretty good grounds to go in and file a lawsuit and say, hey, look, they changed the regulation and I'm the only one being penalized. So, you know, that's, I think, a point that really needs to be considered. I always thought and this is just a personal remark, I always thought the advantage of following the Saratoga County Sewer District was we weren't put in a situation where somebody would come in and say, oh, you're being prejudicial against me. We're like, no, we got a separate organization that determines this whole thing, and we're following what they do. And if you look at their documents, it's very well thought out as well. And, you know, so I just, you know, bringing that up as a point as well. Tom Peterson can respond. Lydia wants to say
I
something.
just want to state a sort of a corollary to Chris's point, which is this whole owner-occupied thing is benefiting one person who's been very vocal about it, which is also a concern to pass a rather elaborate scheme that particularly benefits one person.
I would weigh in and agree with you, Lydia, on that, because I think over the years, where most of us are aware that there's been 2 to 4 landlords who, I want to be kind, who have been whining about how unfair it is that they are being charged extra units, even though they're deriving income and collecting rent from these tenants. Now, there's a guy down on Route 9 in particular who has 6 units, being charged for 6 units right now, and has been yelling and screaming for years. Now, his well ran dry some time ago, and the village put a water line across so he could have village water, and he's been charged for 6 units, and he thinks it's unfair. And I don't know what's so unfair about it, to be honest with you. And the other guy, the other most vocal guy, is renting his apartment, and he could pass this cost along to his tenant, and probably does. But he believes, because he lives there, that he shouldn't have to pay this extra unit fee. And so I don't understand. I agree with you. I think there's a couple of situations here that are very dubious at best. We're trying to get a couple whining people off our backs, and I don't know that it's fair to the rest of us.
That is certainly one way of looking at it, but as Paul mentioned, I would look at it as encouraging owner-occupied rentals. I don't know if you want to hear my horror stories of fat guy in a Speedo running around cursing who used to live behind me, or the neighbor who had 50 auto lead acid batteries stored 3 feet from my house, and the landlord was unreachable. So I've got a few horror stories about stuff that actually happened in the village. So I'm very serious about encouraging owner-occupied rentals.
Gary, with all due respect, I would say that all the problems I've ever had living in the village have come from owner-occupied properties.
Well, you're fortunate then.
I definitely was not thinking there was only one person. I can kind of guess who you're talking about, but I'm not really aware of the people. I would thought there were, 4, 6, and I know of one person in particular who lives in a house and is renting an apartment, and may move from that and have 2 rental units and no owner occupied, and this would theoretically come into play there, but there may be no net change, but that person would have a benefit if they stayed in the house and rented one out, but no benefit if they just move out and rent both halves.
That is correct. That's what happened, actually.
If you're going to stay with this model of as a solution, I know a lot of it is based on what happened in Maltaville, which was a failed issue because it just never got approved. But what we ought to do is if we're going to use this as the model, then we ought to take this model, apply it to every taxpayer who gets water in the village around Lake, and then see what the changes and the numbers look like.
What model are you talking about, Tom?
Well, the one that you kind of passed out. I realize that there's some changes here that you maybe don't apply. But I'm saying if we want to use some kind of model like this, then we really ought to show it in a round lake taxpayer document or spreadsheet or whatever. So in other words, we know, for example, that Nellison is paying for 1 unit right now, but under a new model, he pays 1 unit minus or 1 unit plus, or Bergen pays 1 minus plus based on whatever square foot. What about Lydia's Bakery? What about the mill? You know, I don't really know. I mean, I think it would be more important to see it as it affects Round Lake than, you know.
Talking about a huge project,
Yeah.
which I don't know, it would, I'm not sure what the benefit of that would be. But at the moment, you're a single house. 95% plus are single homes in the village, so there would be 1 benefit unit. So
I think for the most part, it would not change the flat rates that most places are paying. It's more about handling these edge cases where there's, you know, maybe the current system, because Round Lake is unique, right? I mean, it's not the same as anywhere else in Saratoga County. So there are unique situations in this village that sometimes maybe the edge cases don't account for. And I think that's sort of cleaning up some of that stuff in a prospective fashion, I think I think that's what the goal is here. You know, for 90% of people or 95% of people, it's probably going to have no difference whatsoever.
Well,
But,
I agree with you, Matt. And I'll shut up after this. I agree with you, Matt. But I don't think the edge cases are landlords at Burlington and George or the guy on Route 9. I don't think those are edge cases. I think the mill is an edge case. Not the mill.
the mill's not a water customer.
The inn is an edge case.
Mhm.
And I think Victorian Landings is an edge case, and that's not even part of this discussion.
Right. Do you know so the mill does not, we don't bill for water or sewer for the mill, correct? They have their own well, and they're billed 21 units by Saratoga County for their sewer. I thought that was pretty high. I just said 21 units they pay for their sewer. And I did talk to the owner of the inn, and I had a nice conversation with him. And I'm going to be going in there next month to do a fire inspection. So I can get inside. The 1 unit place I can't get inside is the place down on the lake with the 6 units. And I always thought maybe we should require certain multifamily buildings to have operating permits. And that way we could do an inspection for an operating permit. We required for all the commercial, for the restaurants, the churches, but we don't require it for the inn or that 6-unit apartment building. It might be something we could consider down the road. And Chris, I just wanted to say, Schedule E on your income taxes, that's what you would be using for that deduction.
Peter, I know this is off the subject, but I did. Using TurboTax, I filled out Schedule E for our rental property, and it all came up with a loss. And then it told me I wasn't allowed to use any of the loss in my taxes for whatever the tax rules had to do with, mostly because it's one property.
Right.
I think the rules are very different once you own more than a certain number of properties.
Exactly. Right.
So, you know, the one property owner gets
screwed.
You know, no
love
from the IRS. They basically
right.
took my deduction and said, yeah, no, you don't get to use that. But That's really a whole different issue.
So back to the inn for a second. We have they don't have to come to us for anything. Where does a certificate of occupancy come from?
From the village.
From the village. And is that something that happens every year or what?
No, it happens when it,
Renovation?
once, you want to, if you have a change of use, and with the inn, it was a change of use. It went from one use to another, so they get a new certificate of occupancy.
Okay, and that hasn't happened in a while?
Well, it shouldn't, if it's been an inn for 15 years, that once you get that certificate of occupancy, it's good. You're covered for,
Oh, okay.
unless
As
you
an inn,
change.
just as an inn, it doesn't matter what they do in there, but if it has a certificate of occupancy as an inn.
Right, if they wanted to make it into a restaurant, they would have to change that certificate of occupancy.
But isn't there also the assumption that they would have had to have gotten building permits to add bathrooms? And we would have some record of that?
Maybe.
Or
That's
maybe-
the assumption.
Or maybe not.
Right, I look at it and say, they haven't pulled a building permit there in a long time. I've seen stuff going out of the building, like in a dumpster, but they never pulled a building permit. The owner was very nice, and he said, next month, I can come next month and do a fire inspection. I don't have an issue with it. I know that they do have a number of bathrooms. I'm going to guess 15 bathrooms in the building.
I would bet Saratoga County has no awareness of
Oh,
that.
no.
I think over the last 10 or 15 years, and when Lydia had the house next door, one of the managers said, oh, well, we're trying to add a lot of bathrooms so every room has its own bathroom. And it sounds to me like, that's a whole other issue, that the fact that they added all these bathrooms without ever getting a permit to do the work.
Right, so I'll be in there next month to take a look. But I always thought that maybe the inn and maybe the multifamily units should have operating permits, so we can inspect them. If they don't let us in for a fire inspection, we could at least go in and for an operating certificate, and if they don't allow us in, we can close them down.
Mr. Peterson, what are your thoughts on that?
I think Tom's gone. Oh,
Have we asked and been refused information on the inn?
no, I've never, he's been very open. I mean,
Why are we presuming a problem?
well, I don't have a problem with the inn. I have a problem with the 6 units on the lake with the he won't let me in. I have never been in that building.
Okay, I mean, the village could make it subject to an operating permit.
Yeah.
Is there any way somebody, the attorney, the code enforcement, a representative of the village would be able to walk into these 2 places and kind of get an assessment as to what they're like?
No. Unless you have a reason to believe that something illegal is occurring inside, then despite what the New York State Building Code says, you do not have a right to go in and inspect.
Well, in the case of the inn, I don't know about illegal, but illegal in terms of its assessment, wouldn't that be grounds?
You can't go in there unless you're invited, whether you're the assessor or the building inspector.
Okay.
But here, at least with one of those 2 entities, the owner appears to be cooperative.
Talk about paper streets now.
Well, I'm just hearing strange noises.
That's Tom's microphone, I believe.
Okay.
I think I may have unmuted when somebody else simultaneously did it, when we had a noise or something. I don't know where this discussion's going. I see what Gary put out, and I see what it is, and I understand it. But I don't really know where we go from here. Is there some idea that anybody wants to float around, or what?
I was just hoping to have a little bit more to see if gauge the opinions of the public on what these ideas are. And we've heard from Chris and Lydia. I think, to me, it makes logical sense to have some sort of, clearly there are cases right now where the current system is not working for certain areas. And I think that this revision would attempt to address that. But certainly, if Peter goes in next month and finds out that they've got 20 bathrooms and Saratoga County updates that for the inn, and then we can find out some other, if we can fit the current system to account for those and update them in a different way, then I'm all for it. But I just want to make sure that we have a system that works for the village, and works in all cases and fairly for everybody. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. I was hoping to see if there was any other ideas that people had but it's
I would agree, Matt. I think that if you look at the mill, if they're paying 21 units, and if you look at the data that Malta has online, they're paying 21 units in sewer.
Yeah,
I'm sure that they don't know it. They don't have a clue of what's going on at the end.
right. So maybe it's as simple a case as that, and maybe we can kind of be happy with that, and the squeaky wheels will continue to be squeaky. I do believe that they do raise some fair point. Their argument is that certain people rent floors of their house, several rooms, and I do understand where they're coming from with that case, because they are also generating rental income. So for them, that is perceived as an inequity. So I do understand, even though they do present it in somewhat of a gruff way sometimes, I do understand where they're coming from. I do believe that sort of having some sort of owner-occupier bonus, it doesn't hurt the person that's renting their floor out or a couple of rooms, and it levels the playing field for those that are getting another benefit unit or another flat rate attached simply because they have a second door. So I do understand where they're coming from. And I do think they have somewhat of a point with that.
I'd like to actually make 2 points on that owner-occupied piece. Number one is, when you rent rooms in your house or even a floor, you haven't renovated your house for the purpose of turning it into a unit that generates income. It's a distinguishable situation, I believe. And secondly, while I don't disagree with all the owner-occupied virtues that are being extolled, it's just not, to me, the thing that's going to persuade somebody to continue to occupy their home if there's an opportunity to rent it. I mean, it might be one of many incentives, but I don't think that's going to be the deal breaker or maker.
I agree with that. I do think it's somewhat of an encouragement, but I do agree that it's not going to be the be all and end all. But I think that this sort of revision doesn't penalize somebody for renting a room in their house. What it does is sort of levels that playing field a little bit. I can understand the argument both ways. If you're making money, you're making money, and how does that, there's all sorts of different ways we could look at how we bill for water. If you've got a family of 12 people living in a house, you're going to be using a lot more water than a single person using a house. So you could charge for that.
You pay for that on the usage side.
Not really, because the majority of our bill is really 80% of the bill is the flat rate, for most, the per gallon. So that's what I'm saying. We could lower the flat rate to say $100 and just charge more per gallon, for instance. And then all of a sudden, if you had a larger household, you'd be charged more. And if you had a smaller household, you'd be charged. There's all kinds of different ways you can do it. And there's always going to be people that are aggrieved by the system, and there's going to be people that benefit by the system.
I guess that was kind of my point, is to find something that's going to make everyone happy is a fool's errand. If there's somebody who's going to be advantaged or disadvantaged by
I think this system pleases the most people. I think that's what I like about it. It actually makes more people happy than the current system. And I'm not just talking about the two people that are squeaky wheel. I think that there's other instances also. So again, I'm open to ideas on it, but I think that there are merits to looking at how we bill for water. It's like changing your bank account, right? Nobody likes to change your bank account, and nobody likes to do anything. Nobody likes to make big changes to anything. I totally understand that. We've had this system for 10 or 12 years. Why not? It works for 95% of people. Everybody's kind of mostly happy. Why not just leave it as it is? I totally understand that. But I think sometimes it's worth looking at these things and idea generating. I think that's what the whole point of this is right? It's workshopping. We're not passing anything tonight. We're open to ideas. Some people like to keep the system as it is. No harm, no foul. I can certainly see that argument. I can see an argument for making some changes also. I'm very open-minded on it. I do think we need to look at some of these edge cases where the current system is not working, but if we can do that by, different methods, so be it.
But Matt, the edge cases, other than the inn, are pretty much small potatoes.
Well, I'm not going to single out any specific people, but I've done some analyses where, there are certain people that are getting away with murder with what they're getting charged for, for water. So, I would disagree with that there are more than just 2 or 3 cases where I think that this system is not working. I think there's more than that. And there's some people that are getting, I think maybe overcharged. So, I'm open to making revisions to the system, again, knowing that these things are never easy to do, and that sometimes it's easier just to leave things as they are. I totally understand that argument and that it's good for most people right now, but I think that there are certainly areas where I think that a benefit unit system, and I think that one of the best benefits of this is that it's clear for people going forward also. So not just reevaluating things as it stands, but having a system in place that looks forward also, and is transparent.
And I don't disagree at all on that, except that I think what we need to know as trustees and the public would need to know is however you're implementing, whatever model you're using,
we're using. I mean, it would be us.
Yeah. So whatever model we decide to implement, it isn't going to be the one that Gary originally put out, because he was talking about stuff in Maltaville and all this kind of stuff. So we agree that that's not exactly what we'd put out. So we really need to see what we'd put out for the entire village, and then we can have a discussion about whether this makes any sense at all. Sure. I don't have a problem with the end, and I don't have a problem with the inequities, wherever they are. But I need to see how it applies to the village.
I mean, if there are inequities as far as water usage, if you say people are getting away with murder, why aren't we talking about usage? Why aren't we talking about billing properly for usage?
Because most of the cases, like for instance, there are cases where I don't disagree with that also. I think we could look at increasing I think one idea, and this is an idea that I brought up in the committee, would be to actually increase the per gallon usage charge and decrease the flat rate. I think it has some benefits in terms of helping out smaller households, but not going to the extreme of totally whacking larger households, because they contribute in different ways to the community. But also encouraging conservation. There are people that have leaks right now on their property that they're tens of thousands of gallons that are going into the ground every 6 months, and they don't really care because it's getting charged $25 or whatever for the 20,000 gallons. So, or you look at the sprinkler system up at Victorian Landing that's using 20% of all the water usage in the village over the course of the 6-month period. So, there are things like that where, the consumption could be a factor. Again, and that's what I hope this would all be about tonight, was looking at various different ideas, not just necessarily the benefit unit idea, but floating some different ideas to generate a system that works for us. And then I think usage could be one of the ideas that we look at. But again, I'm not going to single out a specific person, but one of the largest beneficiaries in terms of the current system, in terms of the consumption, is a commercially generating, income generating property. So, and they're charged just a couple of 3 flat rates. So, there could be, I think there's ways to look at this to make a more equitable system for everybody. That's all.
I think you made a really good point there that we have not really talked about, and that is, should we be shifting some toward usage? Because I think I care a lot about conserving water, and I generally try to, but even I am less concerned about, the water's still running, so let it run. It's easier for me to go across the kitchen and come back again. And if it was shifted so that I wouldn't be interested in feel we should raise the water usage rate unless we're equally lowering the big bill. And if that were done, I think it would really help promote the environment, and that's a reason to look at that maybe in conjunction with this.
Yeah, and without totally hosing my family of 6 people, but it's one of those things where you want to try to get people to conserve water, but you also don't want to make it totally on consumption, because my house derives, everybody's house derives some benefit from having a water and sewer system, right? That's beyond just the number of people in the house. So there.
That's why you would definitely not move it all over to consumption, but it seems out of whack now when I see the bills.
Right.
And I thought you just live on Evian anyway.
Yes. Yeah. 3 times a night I bathe in Evian. Yeah.
And I didn't know that 20% of the village water was being used for the lawn. That I hadn't heard somewhere along the line. I don't think I heard that one before. That's a lot. That's a lot.
Don't quote me on the specific number, but it's around 15 or 20%. Yeah. In terms of
I'm sorry, but I'm really kind of surprised with this. So you're telling me that up the hill sucks up 15 to 20% of our.
If you look at the total gallons, yeah.
Well, there's an issue there, and I guess that's another point that has to be discussed at some point. I mean, they don't go through our system. They get their water directly from Clifton Park Water Authority. They don't go through our water tower or our filtering system or anything.
They go through our meter pit, though.
Yes, correct.
So the volume.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah. So there's a whole other consideration. I mean, they do have a homeowners association. I don't know how that affects their water and whatnot, but I mean, that's actually, I'm stunned to hear that that's the total volume they have.
Could you clarify, Matt, when you said that, I thought you were talking about watering the lawns, but you mean all the usage at Victorian Landing?
If we look at the, I don't know if you have the spreadsheet in front of you, Gary, because I haven't looked at it in a long time, but they pay for it's through the HOA, I believe, for watering. And if you look at the gallons compared to the total gallon usage of the village, it's significant.
So you're talking about basically the water usage that isn't from each individual unit up at Victorian Landing, but just the additional water usage, which is mostly groundwater.
But they pay. We pay Clifton Park Water Authority for X amount of gallons of water, and so the way we work right now is essentially, this is not 100% accurate, but our flat rate essentially pays the debt service on the infrastructure, essentially. And the per gallon charge essentially pays for the water. So So whatever, we pay $50,000 a year to Clifton Park Water Authority. The $50,000 is derived, that trickles down to each individual homeowner in terms of the water gallon usage that they use. So and the flat rate, this is not 100% lined up, but the flat rate essentially pays for the debt service on the infrastructure. So that's kind of how the system works right now. Now, there's no reason why, if it costs $3.40 per 1,000 gallons from Clifton Park Water Authority, there's no reason why we can't charge, $5 and use that extra $1.50 to service the debt and then reduce the flat rate. So therefore, the people that are using more water or service, paying more towards the infrastructure, you could do that, or you could do it a number of different ways. But as far as I understand it, the irrigation system up there is just charged for their consumption. They're not charged a flat rate or anything like that. So they're charged for the consumption. And is that correct, Kim?
No, so it's a Victorian Landings irrigation system, and it waters all the green space. It's not for any of the residents.
Right.
And they have one flat rate, and then they have usage. So their bills, basically, they have one of their bills over the winter is just a flat rate. There's no water used for the lawns. And in the summer, I charge them about $3,000 for 6 months, and that's it. It's just for consumption.
Yeah,
that's it. I have a hard time believing that that's 20% of the overall usage.
Look at the gallons.
Village.
Look at the gallon. If we have if you look at the gallons used.
Yeah.
And then look at what they use compared to the entire village.
Can I interrupt for half a second?
Yeah, we're getting way off topic.
Victorian Landings is paying for the water that they use.
They
right?
are correct.
Right. And for every 1,000 gallons of water they use, the village makes about $1.25 in profit, right?
I don't know the exact number, but
it's somewhere around $1 per 1,000 gallons in profit. So really, if Victorian Landings uses even more water, the village the village makes even more money. Now, I understand, Matt. I don't disagree with your water conservation issue, but the Saratoga County Water Authority can produce 6 or 8 million gallons of water a day. If we can get Victorian Landings to buy 10,000 gallons of water a day, we should actually be happy because we're profit every day.
I disagree with that, but I know what you're saying. We don't profit from it. We basically pay. When I said that the flat rate essentially pays for the debt service, that there is a little bit left over on the per gallon that does pay for the debt service. So we're not profiting from it. We're paying off the debt service, but there's ways that you can change that calculation so that it's more per gallon, less per gallon, higher flat rate, lower flat rate. I mean, the big reason why people grumble about the flat rate is because it's so high. So I just think there's different, what I'm saying is there's different ways we can do it to encourage conservation. Potentially could be one of our goals. One of our goals could be to encourage owner-occupied residences. One of our goals could be to increase conservation. I just think it's good to think about these ideas instead of just saying, well, we have a system and it's fine and let's just leave it as it is. I just think we should think about as a board kind of what we want to do. And when residents come to us, yes, they grumble, and yes, they grumble for a long time, but it's our job as trustees to listen and look at the system and address, Tom, you may think that, they're just complaining and they have no grounds, and I may think they might have a point, and that's our job as a board, is to address those things and address those inequities where we see them, and maybe just tell them that they're full of it when we don't think they have a case. So that's I just think we ought to think about these things a little bit more and come up with rational solutions. That's all.
Yeah, I think we have plenty to think about for now. So I would like to suggest that we move on to the next topic.
I would like to say a couple more things. One, I don't see the point of charging people who have acreage.
We are not doing that.
Well, we're not doing anything yet. This was what I understand now is that this is just a reference point at someone else's document with a couple comments that you added. But I just want to make sure, because I don't see the point at all for the couple people that have acreage, why they should be charged more water. For me, water, yes, every unit, every piece of property has to pay something to have water and sewer. So we have a flat rate. But I think usage is an important part of this. If you're not using a lot of water, then why should you have to pay a lot? And if it makes sense to discuss lowering the flat rate, and people can understand if they use more water, then they're going to have to pay more. I think that's fairly logical. I don't know why people would grumble about that. If the main problem is that people think the flat rate is too high, and we see that it makes sense that if you use more water, you should pay for more water, then why aren't we looking at that?
Well, one of the things about that is we could lower the flat rate and increase the usage rate, and that may backfire in that people will then conserve and not.
Yeah,
You won't get the revenue because
that's exactly.
Yeah.
That is exactly the problem, and then you're forced to change your rates more frequently. So that's the absolute downside to a pure usage bill, is that people do conserve. So it actually works, and then you end up having to change your rates more frequently to make sure that you're getting the revenue that you need. So yeah, that's right, Tom. And that's one of the benefits to having a higher flat rate, is that we don't have to deal with that as much. And then I think the other thing is that everybody benefits to a certain extent from having the infrastructure. It's not necessarily the usage, but I do agree that usage should be, and it is a component, but we can talk about.
Yeah, I mean, not if it's pouring out in the street and nobody cares. I mean, I never looked at, honestly, that closely at my bill, but I know when a construction person at a neighbor's house turned on my water and left it on for a week, I was flipping out, not only for conservation reasons, but because I thought it would be very expensive. I assume that if I use more water, that I should have to pay more. And, so maybe it needs some adjustment. Maybe it's just some adjustment.
With respect to the issue that our revenue will go down if there were conservation, keep in mind that our payments to the Clifton Park Water Authority would also go down correspondingly because we're paying for less gallonage.
One other related thing, Matt, we don't have to get into it completely now, but I'm just curious. I would like to know, if this goes forward, we talk about that more, what car-related communities around here, not in Round Lake, pay per gallon. I mean, are we paying less or more already? If we want to adjust it, would we be bringing in line to what others pay, or would we be way higher than what others are paying? So
I think we had those figures. I remember us discussing this in the past.
I don't need to know it tonight, but that's something I'd want to know, what they pay in each of the other communities per gallon.
Well, where do we go from here?
Well, it's been a good discussion, and I think you should sit back, think about it, and we're not planning, obviously, taking any action on it tonight. So,
I do think it'll help if Peter could report back to us after he evaluates there. I think Chris made some good points about sometimes doing nothing legally is the safest, but I think if we do the right thing, that makes sense too. So it would help me in my thinking pattern if we see there's a real inequity in what one place like the Inn is paying. That might have an effect on what we do for the rest.
I agree. I think I'd like to see some more about this from Peter. Not from just because it's the Inn, but I think I just like to start getting a base of what we're starting from. I'd also like, and we did generate this stuff in the past, and without any changes, it would be nice to see a document that I don't know that we have to edit it or black it out. I don't know if Tom Peterson would say about all our water users, how many units they're charged, what they pay, and all that kind of stuff, what their consumption is. We used to generate these things every 6 months, but I haven't seen one in a while. So it would be nice to see one. I'd like to know where I stand in the pack of water users, for example, and I'm sure some of the rest of us would like to also.
You can do that.
And I think this is a good discussion.
I think it's very good. I think it's very productive. I'm glad everybody. I'm glad a couple of people here chimed in, because I think it's going to take a while, but maybe we can find some way to make it equitable or more equitable or fair or whatever.
Okay, any public comment on this topic before we move on to paper streets? Okay, the paper streets discussion I thought would be a very long one, but
Oh, it won't.
Let's just start it tonight and maybe
no, it
follow up
actually
next month.
won't be that long because over the last week or so, some work that Peter did and Tom Peterson have brought to light the fact that most paper streets are in fact public parkland, so that we are severely limited in what we can do with paper streets. If you're going to sell a paper street and it's parkland, it's an entirely different situation. So
I do have a comment about that. The paper streets, some of them have been designated parkland on the county tax map. Others, which probably should be designated parkland, have not, because the language in what's commonly referred to as the parkland deed talks about the fact that village land, which includes a walkway or a common way which has not been paved, leading from the park, shall also be deemed parkland. And that's not always clear. So I think perhaps one of the things we should do is sit down with the tax map, take a look at the language from the parkland deed, and decide which of those streets are indeed parkland and which are not. And then having a policy with respect to the paper streets that are not parkland would be the next order of business.
I think Peter did a great deal of that already. He got something from the reassessment update project, and there's a stack of papers that's pretty thick. Each one is one plot, one tax map plot, and many of them are the paper streets. And he went through and cross-checked it with the quitclaim deed and indicated whether it was parkland or not. So we've got a very good start on that already. And I reviewed it and I went over, and that's why I said that the vast majority of what we say is parkland is, the vast majority of what we say are paper streets are considered parkland. Peter, do you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I think that if I read the parkland deed, if there's a paper street that leads to parkland or is attached to parkland, it's automatically parkland. I went over a list with the assessor of all village properties, village-owned properties, and basically they consider them all, almost all of them, parkland. I mean, the issue to me was I was looking to see if the paper street off Barn Alley, there's a paper street that runs, there's a couple of garages on that paper street. It kind of floats in the middle. It's not attached. The paper street doesn't run anywhere. It's like people's backyards. But the only access to that paper street is through parkland. The lot, and I have, the lot is number and everything. It's on both sides of the Barn Alley, and that's called, it's parkland. So in order to get to the paper street, you have to go through parkland. And in my interpretation, that would make that paper street parkland.
And I think that's correct. But there's one issue which is kind of up in the air, and that is, what if there is a paper street that on paper connects to parkland, but it is bisected from the parkland by a paved street? So I think that a little bit of analysis would be beneficial, and we present those vagaries to the board, and the board can make a determination. And once that determination is made, we may want to amend the parkland deed, or we may want to enact a resolution that specifies which of those paper streets that are separated from the park by a paved road are indeed parkland.
Correct. You know what surprised me, Tom, was that all the paths in Griffin's Ridge, there are, I think, 3 paths, and which run to the bike trail. According to Malta, they're all parkland. All those paths, walking paths, are considered parkland, which I found interesting. They put that. I didn't see it in our parkland deed, but they consider it parkland.
But if it's not on the deed, is it parkland then?
Well, it predates the deed.
Well, let me give you an example. We have a paper street, I believe, 4th Street. I just know because I live on it. There's 2 sections of 4th Street. The first one goes from Wesley to Covell, and I'm guessing that is not parkland because there's no park on either side of it. Yet it continues across Covell and goes to, it used to go over the hill to George, but now it just dead ends, at the hillside. Now, I don't know if Mount Morris is considered parkland. I'm guessing it is.
Yeah, it is.
So I would just guess from what you're saying is that the section of 4th Street, at least from Covell straight back to where you can go upstairs and go into that parkland, would be considered parkland then.
Correct.
I would consider it an active street that's just a dead end.
Well, that's true. It is an active street, and that might change things completely because there's a case where something's an active street. And that may be the case on the Barn Alley also, and whether you can suddenly take an active street and make it parkland, I don't know.
Barn Alley is definitely not an active street.
Well, it is for the people who have the land there. I mean, Covell between, 4th between Covell and the park is used by 3 homes to get in and out. So
well, it's not a street. It's a plot of land that they consider parkland. It's not, people may use it to go back and forth, but it's not a street. It's not listed.
You talking about the Barn Alley one now?
Yeah, it's not listed as a street. It's just a plot of land that they say is parkland.
Although it's smooth and graded like a street.
You get access to it through this parkland right here, and here's the paper street.
But does the village maintain that? Because it looks like a street.
The village does not maintain it.
Oh, okay. That's a little different then. Right.
Every parcel is going to be different. If it's not already designated parkland by the county, then I think that Peter and Tom should sit down together and identify all of those parcels that are not yet identified as parkland and present them to the board and let the board make a determination as to whether the board finds them to be parkland. Parkland law in New York makes it very easy for something to be designated parkland. And once it is, it's almost impossible to use it for any other purpose. If the board has declared it to be parkland, if it has been used as parkland, it's parkland. The fact that it's a public way doesn't keep it from being parkland. So I think Peter and I should sit down and find those parcels that are not clearly parkland and make a report to the village board, and let the village board make the determination. And once the determination is made, put it in the form of resolution so that there's no question about what is and what is not parkland.
Clarification, if you have something that, a paper street that is now, that we know from the deed is part of the parkland, is it actually not a paper street anymore? Is it really just part of the park? Or is it still a paper street? In other words, we have on that deed from the 1990s, certain paper streets became parkland because they were adjacent to a park, let's say. Does that mean if they haven't been developed, let's say, does that mean they're actually not paper streets anymore? They're just part of the park?
That's correct. The term paper street doesn't mean anything in Round Lake, because a paper street, as it's understood under New York law, is something designated as a street on a subdivision plat, which has not actually been developed as a street.
Right.
And we don't have a subdivision plat. The 1893 map that we're looking at is not a subdivision plat.
Right. But if we have a paper street, let's say, I think maybe there was one that was discussed recently by, is it Harris Park? Is that Ninth? But in any event, that's actually part of the park by the last deed. We can still, if we want, allow parking on these areas within a park if we want to, right?
Well, we can allow parking on the edge of a park. We can't allow a park to be used as a parking lot.
Right. So if we have, I'm only thinking of this example where we have a street that I know, what I thought of as a paper street that I know has been used for parking for as long as I've been here, I think. And now we discover, oh, that's actually part of the parkland, which is next to it. There's no real issue there. The fact that if we allow that parking there to continue, it's not like suddenly, oh, wait a minute, that's part of the park. Get all these cars off of here and get rid of the gravel.
Using that graveled paper street, if you will, as a parking lot, if it is indeed parked, it's inconsistent with its nature as a park.
Although we might need parking for a park. We could never put parking on the edge of a park.
You can put parking on the edge of a park. To use a park as a parking lot would not be legitimate.
Right. If you take the whole park and make it a parking lot. All right. Well, it's a bit of it is semantics, but I was just curious whether
in this same park
it is, and
around the edge.
Perhaps more than anything else, it's a question of enforcement.
All right.
All right, so shall we take Tom's advice and revisit this when we have some more info?
Absolutely. I think it's,
Heidi,
yeah, I agree.
Heidi, you're muted if you were talking.
I just appreciated the visuals.
Yeah.
just learned how to do that.
Good job. Tom, you're muted.
And we wouldn't really be concerned or talking about, I know people have come in the past and currently and in the future about purchasing a paper street. That's something we can take up after we have a better sense of what's actually left after we mark off the parkland.
Yes, that's right.
Because I think there has in the past at least been a sense that if we have a little bit of a paper street that's just within one person's property and goes nowhere, and they have the land on both sides, we have allowed that sometimes in the past. But generally speaking, if it's used by multiple residents, we have not allowed it.
I think what we've done is that we've required that all persons who are adjacent to that parcel are put on notice, but the village is required by law to accept the highest bid. So far, that hasn't caused a problem. Obviously, it could.
I read somewhere, I thought it was in our laws, I may be wrong, that if we want to sell a paper street between two properties, we have to, or at least offer half to one and half to the other.
I'm not aware of that.
No.
I'll have to,
It's probably a moot point anyways if it's parkland, if it's determined that it's
well, if
park.
it's parkland, I'm talking about the ones that prove not to be parkland.
Right. The
But
ones
anyway, let's
we've
worry
always
about it
called
down the road.
anomalies.
Yeah, we'll worry about that down the road. I think we're not doing anything until we know where things stand.
Can I make one small hair splitting comment?
Okay.
When this thing was done in 1995 and declared that anything that was not currently used as a street is now that is adjacent to parkland is now also parkland. What is this? I mean, is there a strict definition in that case of what was currently used as a street? I mean, if people were driving down it to get to their property, if the village, whether or not the village was improving that road or not, would that have been considered being used as a street at that time?
I'm not looking at the document now, but I believe that it provided that if the piece of village land that was adjacent to a park was being used as a public way, either a path or a road or anything else, and it was not paved, then it would be considered parkland.
Correct, Tom. That's it.
And that's how we ended up selling a couple of pieces of property to people where the property wasn't being used to go anywhere. Like I can remember Filkins in particular on Burlington. They had a split right down between their two lots, but it went to a private lot, the split. And I think also there was a couple of instances where some of a paper street went under a porch or two, but it didn't go anywhere. I mean, it didn't go to another place. It was just unused land, I guess, for a better word.
The one by Filkins is the one behind Kim's house. And instead of splitting it down the middle and giving half to each property owner that way, they split it kind of lengthwise. So we have this very weird square, which is a separate parcel.
You're talking about Kim's current new house?
Correct.
Okay.
Here's an example of, I think, what you're talking about. Griffin Ave, Bodnarik's house, and then continue on with Griffin Ave, and the Paper Street portion of New York Ave, Wager's house, and then this is Bangs Ave, by the way, and then continuing with New York Ave. So somewhere along the line, the street portion got absorbed.
You may find that there's a separate portion of the parkland deed that deals with property that is west of Washington Avenue.
Yeah, I pulled it up again. I must have misread it. The and is so it says was paved and used as a public thoroughfare, not paved or used as a public thoroughfare. So my mistake on that.
There's a lot going on here, which is why I think that Peter and I should sit down and identify anything that's a shade of gray and present it to the board and let the board make a determination.
Okay. Tom Peterson, a term clarification. When it says paved, do they mean asphalt, or could it be it's been paved and maintained as a gravel base?
I missed that day in law school. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. When Matt just read that if it's paved and used.
No, I understand the question.
No.
I don't know the answer.
Oh, you don't know the answer. I didn't hear the question, right?
Yeah, that's I guess where I was coming from with the specific case of Barn Alley, but
All right, public, any comments? Okay, anything else for the good of the order or motion to adjourn?
I think we got our marching orders, so I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second,
Second,
discussion? Yes.
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 All right, well, thank you all. This was interesting.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. I hope everybody has a good night.
Good night,
And
everybody.
I'm glad we didn't try to do this during one of our regular monthly meetings.
Me neither.
We'd be here till 2 in the morning. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.